Hello, everyone, and welcome to another race breakdown analysis. And of course, this is the Ronde van Vlaanderen, the 105th edition of the Tour of Flanders for us English speakers. Anyways, as always, I'm joined by Mr. Critical himself, Ewan. How was this race? And yeah, for me, of course, it was absolutely amazing to see Kasper Asgreen win.
Well, the Ronde, as I always say, is my favorite classic of the year. And this year, it was another fabulous edition for the history books with a phenomenal finish and an absolute battle of the Titans up at the front. But it took some time to get there. We had an early breakaway at the start of the day. They had a 13-minute lead. Most notably, we had Stefan Bissegger in there. Behind, we had two riders disqualified due to a sort of dangerous riding between Fedorov and Vlaanderen. They were thrown out the race with over 200 kilometers to go. When the race started getting spicy, 90 kilometers to go, we saw Mads Pedersen getting dropped, many people's picks for the day, not the Dane who managed to surprise everyone. But between 70 and 60 kilometers to go, we saw many attacks coming from Kevin Genietz. We saw Søren Carl Andersen all try to go, but this was all marred by a big crash that happened at around about 65k to go, when we saw many Deceuninck Quickstep riders go down. Alaphilippe was held up by the crash, as was Kasper Asgreen. Most notably, Christoph was kind of ruled out of the race from that point onwards. It didn't look the same after that point. Then with 55 kilometers to go, we lost another big favorite due to a crash. Stefan Koen crashed on an uphill before we saw this dynamic sort of emerge. Van der Poel and Kasper Asgreen were attacking each other, and both of them were sort of playing with each other. They were the only ones to sort of respond to each other's moves, but eventually they were all neutralized. Before the Koppenberg and the Taaienberg, when Alaphilippe managed to blow the race to pieces, bringing out Van der Poel, Van Aert, and so forth to make this group at the front, which looked very promising, of Alaphilippe, Teuns, Marco Haller, Wout van Aert, Mathieu van der Poel, and Kasper Asgreen. Turgis tried to join them many times. He was attacking all the time, but over the Kruisberg, that's when this group all broke up. It's where Asgreen and Van der Poel attacked, and Wout van Aert managed to hold the wheel to make this a phenomenal looking trio. They managed to make it onto the bottom of the Quadramont as a trio, but over the top, Mathieu van der Poel released a Strade Bianca style attack. Absolute wattage and strength to distance Wout van Aert, many people's pre-race favourites, over the top of that climb, and it was only left for him and Kasper Asgreen to duel it out to the finish. Once he reached the final kilometer, it was Van der Poel who was forced to lead out the sprint. Many people thought Van der Poel was going to win, myself included. He was just looking around at Asgreen, looking around, checking when he's going to go. He eventually went with 250 meters to go, and at first it looked like Van der Poel had the upper hand, but eventually 100 meters to go, Van der Poel pulled up, and Asgreen managed to shock the cycling world and take a win. Definitely the biggest win in his career for the Danish champion, and the Deceuninck Quickstep managed to outsmart everyone.
So, of course, we were watching that race live on the stream, and we thought we both, as you said, thought that Mathieu van der Poel had it for the taking. Yeah, what went wrong? Kasper Asgreen is known as this time trial machine, this engine. He's not known as a petrol sprinter kind of thing. It looked like Nicky Terpstra and Alexander Kristoff. That was the kind of finish that we were getting, but this time Terpstra was, the Terpstra roll was the faster.
Yeah, I was expecting 2015 all over again. I thought Van der Poel's the better sprinter, of course, by miles, and Asgreen, it's going to take a lot for him to challenge him, and he bet on his sprint, to be fair. I thought Asgreen had a chance to go earlier on with about 2 kilometers to go, or even try and move over the Paterberg, but he bet on his sprint, and I think his Deceuninck Quickstep teammates like Florian Seneschal knew that he had some legs in him, but I never would have expected him to win this, and there's nothing I think Van der Poel could have done to sort of challenge Asgreen in the end. Yeah, he stopped sprinting, maybe he cramped up and so forth, but that's down to nutrition and gear choice for that. But I think Asgreen just happened to be the stronger man on the day. Many people were saying Van der Poel had too much racing in his legs following Tirreno Adriatico and so forth. But today he looked good up until that final kilometer. And still, I'm flabbergasted by the fact that Kasper Asgreen managed to beat Van der Poel in a sprint, but we've seen it with Sagan many times. You can never second guess a sprint after 250 kilometers of racing.
Like you said in the race recap, the Deceuninck Quickstep actually crashed, and they had most of their big stars on the floor, and Kasper Asgreen was caught up in that. So it could have very quickly been a nightmare situation for the Deceuninck Quickstep. But yeah, where does Kasper Asgreen go from here? We saw that Paris-Roubaix isn't on the agenda next week, and a bit of a shame for the Deceuninck Quickstep.
Exactly. Paris-Roubaix suits Kasper Asgreen to a T, and it would have been fantastic for him to go for that. But of course, we're not going to see that this year. And if it happens, it'll happen in October. So for Asgreen, I think now it's switching his focus on to potentially trying to go for maybe Brabantse Pijl and so forth in the next couple of weeks. But after that, he's got to try and fine-tune himself, put him back in the Sam Bennett sprint train, because he's a very, very vital part of that for Sam Bennett's green jersey bid later in the year. And hopefully Asgreen can try to go for a couple stage wins during the Tour de France. I can definitely see him doing that one. He was lively last year, and I'm sure he's going to be very lively this year, now as the reigning Ronde van Vlaanderen champion.
So we kind of said that Mathieu van der Poel basically rode the perfect race, because we would have expected him to win the sprint. If Kasper Asgreen hadn't shocked the world and kind of managed to outsprint him, we would just be saying, well, Mathieu van der Poel just rode the perfect race. But his rival from last year, Wout van Aert, many people bashed you in the preview for that. What went wrong on the World Quartermont? He didn't look as strong. He did a lot of the work early on as well.
Well, I hate to say it, but I told you so. Wout van Aert wasn't really up there in the end. Heinz Wevelgem was sort of handed to him on a plate in a way. His results at Strade Bianche and also Yves de Hardenbeke and so forth, they proved that he doesn't quite have the legs one-on-one against Van der Poel and Jules Alaphilippe. And today, well, he managed to beat Alaphilippe in the end, but today he couldn't really respond to Van der Poel at all. And people were saying Van der Poel's too tired and so forth, but Wout van Aert, in the end, I just don't think he has the team support in the final kilometers of a race like this. And he also doesn't have the raw kick that's Mathieu van der Poel has, because that is a real asset to him. And once we got to the Paterberg for the final time, Van Aert was swinging from side to side. He lost 20 seconds almost in about 5 kilometers. It was a pretty woeful finale for him. I don't know whether it's a fact of nutrition or tactics, but he just went a little bit too early in the end, and we thought he was resting up and trying to stay a little bit anonymous, but it just didn't work out for him. And a pretty meager result for him in a race like this.
So yeah, as you mentioned just there, Greg Van Avermaet actually managed to sneak onto the podium in the Ronde van Vlaanderen for AG2R Citroën, a team that hasn't really been performing this year compared to the ambitions they had for the Cobblestone Classics. Does this result salvage their campaign for AG2R Citroën?
Yeah, I don't know. I think Citroën would have really wanted a big result from Nassen or Van Avermaet maybe to win. Omloop and Nieuwsblad, which was definitely in their realm, and maybe E3 or Heinz. That hasn't happened. They have only really got a third place finish here at the Ronde. I say only, it's definitely the biggest cobble race we're going to have in this first half of the year, but it does feel like a little bit of a letdown. The team they brought today was phenomenal, and they kind of undersold themselves, and for the past couple of weeks I felt quite underwhelmed by, as you just said, Citroën. But I think Van Avermaet did play it well. He was constantly chasing, and he knew that he could always get third place. And I think him and Jesper Stuyven had a little pact in the end to try to go for it and get the bronze medal for themselves. And I, for one, am very surprised that he managed to outsprint Jesper Stuyven, who is a very good sprinter. He's won sprint stages at Grand Tours in the past. So all credit to Greg Van Avermaet. He could have been someone else to contend at Roubaix. He's won it in the past. But of course, his focus now has to change for different goals of the rest of the season.
So that's basically it for our race recap, analysis, whatever you want to call it, of this year's Ronde van Vlaanderen Tour of Flanders, the 105th edition. And we, of course, saw our first Danish winner since Rolf Sorensen back in 1997. As always, thank you for watching, and we'll see you all again very soon.